Everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Business Blind Spots Exposed podcast. I'll call it Blind Spots because that's a lot shorter. But I want to tell you what the podcast is all about for those who have listened before and those who are joining us for the first time. Here's the purpose of this podcast. For me personally, as an individual, as a professional, as a leader, just a human being, I found that there's lots of things that I don't know, those blind spots. And as soon as I can find those blind spots, gosh, I get so much more powerful. So when it comes to me being a leader, I found that if I can start to understand the narratives of what's happening in business or what's happening with my people around me, gosh, I become so much more powerful in the way I can conduct my business and the outcomes that I can reach. The saying that I use all the time is the greatest leaders are always looking for the emerging stories in their organization so they can choose the ending that they want. We started this podcast so that we can bring the experts who see these stories, who've been there, who've done that, like Helen, who I've got on the line here, to tell us what stories they've seen and the endings that you can create once you start to understand them. Hey, Helen, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm really excited. And let me do a little bit of housekeeping here for everyone anybody who's joining into the podcast. I want to tell you about a couple of upcoming events that we have, because while we're talking to Helen today, I've got some more really interesting people coming up in the coming weeks. On August 19th, I've got Hal Coleman, employees getting their heart in the game. I've always believed that I can pay for somebody's mind, but if I get their heart, I, as the leader, win. Hal's going to kind of lean into that a little about how you get their heart in the game, because gosh, if you get an employee's heart in the game, you don't have to ask. They just do because they want to. On August 31st, I've got Tracy Phillips. Tracy is a very good joint friend of ours, actually. And she's going to be talking about this topic of your verbal communication says everything about you. You know, real quick story here. The first time I met Tracy, she and I had a fantastic conversation. And I said, "Oh, Tracy, look at the time. I have to go pick up my kids." And just as soon as I said that, Tracy kind of looked at me and she said, "You said have to. Why did you use the word have?" And the point is that the word have there indicates that it was something I had an obligation to do that was outside of my choice. And as soon as I realized that something I want to do, I choose to do it. That's what Tracy does. I think you'll find a lot of value in listening to what Tracy does. So a couple things. We have lots of people who are listening in. Please tell us where you're connecting from and who you are. I think that will help shape the conversation that we have with Helen today. So let me introduce you to Helen Moses real quick. I'm going to read a little bit of her bio and her background just so you understand who she is and what she does. So Helen Moses, I'm reading some of this stuff, but I'm going to give you a little bit more color because I know Helen a little bit better than just this bio here. Helen Moses is a voice and communication expert, a TEDx speaker, coach, and owner of Speak Up Communications. I remember the first time I talked to Helen, I started asking about this idea of speaking in front of people. And I think a lot of people think it's just something that you sort of innately learn over time. Actually, after talking to Helen, I realized there's some art to it, but there's a lot of science behind it as well. And that's what Helen really, I learned from Helen very, very quickly in talking with her. Her mission and her work in life is to help individuals and teams communicate with alignment, confidence, empathy, build stronger and more lasting relationships that lead to greater fulfillment, efficiency, and results. Think about that in the context of running a company. If you are much more intentional in the way you speak to your employees and they understand they are able to receive what you're saying so that they know how. A lot of people talk about vision, but you got to have clarity with that vision. If you don't have clarity, they have no idea how to get there. That's what Helen helps people do. So she lives in Raleigh, North Carolina with her husband of 24 years. She's got a 16-year-old daughter, 2 cats, and has a son in college. Expert at making goofy faces. I love that part about you. Love that about Helen. She's a great person to be around. And it was one of those rare people who admit to appreciating punishingly bad humor and puns. One last thing I want to say about you, Helen, is that you recently released this book, Voice Unleashed, Speaking Up with Faith and Courage, and you're just now recording the audiobook. Let's start there. Tell me about this experience of writing with a book and How is it that you distill speaking into a book, into written form?
Well, let's see. How do you? Well, it's for me. This was a nonfiction book. The book is about my journey to find my voice, which started ironically after I began my business as a voice and communication coach.
Mhm.
But it was a necessary process for me to get where I am today. So, in writing the book, it was basically telling my story and telling it as if I were speaking it, writing it that way. And I think that it's actually making my audiobook recording that's going on this week easier for me because I wrote it as I would speak it.
Hmm.
And so I do want to stay ahead of the recording so I can refresh my mind about how I inflected those sentences in my mind when I was writing them. But for the most part, it's gone very well. And I think that's just a testament to just telling my story through the words.
It comes out naturally for you, and as a result, it's easy for you to say it again and again because it's your voice. And I think there's something to tease out of there, right? And I think that's very germane to the topic here that we're talking about today is being able to speak with intention, being able to speak with purpose from who you are. I don't know that we're necessarily taught to do that as children through schools. Would you agree with that as a statement?
Yeah, I would. Yes, I would, because, well, I'm a product of wanting to be in favor of the teachers and performing my best to get good grades, to follow the rules. And of course, I have a bachelor's degree in vocal performance, so I got graded on my voice. So that led me to perform and want to put up this front of who I am and be what I thought everybody else thought I should be, instead of just being me, which now that I'm there is a whole lot easier.
So the audience that I try to talk to, and we try to cater to this to, is to owners of businesses, right? Owners and leaders in businesses. And oftentimes in business, creating that vision of what you want to do, that's what everyone talks about, the visionaries, visionaries, visionaries. But being someone who has fallen into a bunch of personality profiles as a visionary, I almost feel like that's kind of the easy part, saying the visionary part. Creating the clarity is the really hard thing because what's going on in my head makes so much sense to me. It's brilliant in my mind, right? But
Of
then I
course
talk
it
about
is.
right. It's so natural to me. But then I tell somebody else, and like, I have no idea what you're saying. I mean, you're speaking English. I understand the words that are coming out of your mouth, but how do they fit together? Creating clarity, I mean, is almost kind of fundamental to what you do for people. Is that a fair way to state that?
Yes, I would say so. As leaders with visions, as you just said, we have to be able to state those visions clearly or plainly. And it's uh, it's a shame, I'll say it that way. It's a shame that other people can't understand the amazing visions that we have in our minds just readily, right? It would be nice if they could. But what we have to do as leaders is connect to our audience, connect to the people that we are leading. And that means we have to put our vision in terms that resonate with them. That's where the clarity comes in.
So I like to take down and write notes throughout the course of this, just make sure I kind of cement things. And sort of the take home message I got from that is the question to ask yourself is, can you state your visions clearly as a leader? If not, then you're only going to get, you at best will get limited results at best because they can't understand what you're saying. So how could they potentially achieve what you're asking for because they don't understand what you're asking for, right?
Yeah, true.
So if not, then how do you translate that into language that they can receive? Am I using the right language there in saying that?
Yeah, because it's language is the vehicle to get your vision manifested. Communication about what it is. So how do you get that in terms that your audience could be your employees, whoever you're leading, that your audience understands, you have to kind of step into their shoes. Make sure that you're using vocabulary that they're familiar with and not vocabulary that makes sense in your head only. If you're using acronyms or jargon, it's okay if you're talking to people at the level that understand that. But even then, it's best to, at least in the beginning, spell out what that acronym stands for and not assume that everyone understands what those letters mean.
So I want to, one of the Simon Sinek has done this video on, lead from why.
Mm-hmm.
It's a brilliant conversation, right? That's why it's one of the most watched things, and it's so aspirational in what it talks about. But here's the challenge that I have with it. I love the message, but that's like living on the top of Mount Everest in terms of what that topic is. And how do I translate that to every single day? Because right now my kid need to be fed lunch. I need to get on a conference call in a couple of minutes. I got to get an email out the door. Living from why, fabulous, but that's not going to solve the problem in the next 10 minutes, because that's how most of us live, is in response or reaction to what's actually happening next. So break this down for me a little bit, right? This idea of being able to communicate from a vision is fabulous. I love it. Great. But look, I got an employee who's waiting for me, or a customer who's on the phone right now is really upset. Why does it matter being able to communicate clearly as far as what's going to happen in the next 5 minutes for me?
Because you're thinking in the short term and I'm thinking in the long term. Both are necessary. We must do both. We must take care of picking up our kids from school or feeding them lunch or sending that email. But if we just focus on those things, we get caught up in the busyness, busyness, the busyness of just the day-to-day things. And it's like that saying of missing the forest for the trees. Mm-hmm. So we need to have both perspectives, and leaders need to be able to explain the vision and have their why and their company's why in language that is easy and brief for people to understand. And that needs to be out there in the company, like on the website and in messaging and as a reminder. I mean, maybe if you can put that vision into a small tagline, then you can refer back to it enough that it becomes part of the company culture. And the why then is kind of sitting in front of us all, so that when we are doing these busy tasks or these daily tasks that we really have to do, we're doing them with the intention of doing them in order to fulfill the purpose of our role in our company that we work for.
So I'm going to repeat this back to you the way some of the words that popped up for me as you're saying this to me, right? And it's just this idea that, yeah, you think there's this why stuff, which is great, but it doesn't apply, but it actually does apply, because, I mean, there's two words that pop into mind here. We talk so much about efficiency, but then there's this other word, effectiveness, right? You can be incredibly efficient, but you're not very effective. Mm-hmm. Understanding your why is about being more effective, right? You may be efficient in constantly getting through emails, having conversations, picking your kids up, doing this, visiting customers, but they're not getting what you're saying, right? So you're going to have that conversation again and again and again. Now, on the other hand, if you're very good at communicating and building clarity around that, the vision is where you want to take that customer relationship or that employee relationship or that child relationship, parent-child relationship, family relationship. If you're more effective, you may not have to say it as many times and you get there faster. Does that make sense?
Saves a lot of time and energy and money, because in business, time is money.
And for any of people who are listening in, I'd love to hear from you if you see this distinction. I'd love just to, why and yes or no. Do you see this distinction between this efficiency and effectiveness? Because I think that's very, very germane to the conversation here, right? You help people become more effective in the way they talk. Am I saying that properly?
Yes. Efficient too, because I help people who tend to ramble narrow down what they say into more meaningful, shorter chunks. But So efficiency is part of effectiveness, I think.
Okay.
But there is definitely a distinction, and effective, I think, is what we want to strive for part way by being efficient. Does that make sense?
I believe it's. I mean, it's not an either or. It's a combination of the two that gives you that sort of that potency or the capability to do something. Right? Is the
Yes.
effectiveness and the efficiency together.
Yes.
Give me an example. I mean, I know we've talked in the past about having worked in and around customer service. That's some things that you've done a number of times. And maybe that's the example. Give me an example of sort of a business outcome or a symptom or a pain that somebody was having in a company, how you, what they were feeling as that owner or that leader in the company, and sort of what was that journey or that pathway, and kind of how did things change? Is that something you can do for me?
Yeah, I can talk about. I have a contract with a pharmaceutical company, and the people I work with on their team are their what they call patient support specialists, essentially customer service representatives. But they are assigned to patients or caregivers of someone who has a specific disease that their drug is for. And I was hired because these people only have their voice to use. They're only on phone calls, so they don't have the body language and facial expressions to help convey their message and demonstrate why they are on the phone call. It has to be in their voice. So in this case, I was hired to help them, number one, be more efficient. So it's not, they don't have quotas. I have been with companies, worked with companies where they had a quota of a number of calls they had to make per day. And that's, I think, counterproductive because there's so much stress to get through the call. So this company does not have quotas like that. But the point of the call is to get a series of questions answered, follow a series of steps. And the company wanted to make sure that their patient support specialists are able to do that for the caregivers or the patients in the most efficient and the most effective way. So with efficiency, we talk about being shorter with your sentences, not asking multiple questions in a row, but just asking one, allowing silence so people can process what you've said. And then in terms of effectiveness, we talk about that purpose, that why behind their role and their calls. They are there to support these patients and caregivers. That's the number one reason for these calls. No matter what else transpires in the call, the point for them and for the company is to show these patients and caregivers that they are valued, that they are cared for, that they are top of mind. And that makes the patients and caregivers feel much better about their relationship with the company, which allows them to refer more people. I mean, it benefits their bottom line in the long run, but it mainly affects their company culture, and it boosts the confidence of the patient support specialists. They have better skills and understanding of what to do so that they like their jobs more. They feel like they're making a bigger difference through the work that I do with them. Does that help?
It does, and I love my analogies. So I'm trying to kind of maybe back up a little bit from what I heard there in terms of how this could apply really anywhere. Right? I mean, this is kind of a template. Look, people call into your company. Your customers usually call into your company. In this case, the patients. Right? Patients are probably calling from a somewhat, I'll say, an emotionally charged place. Right? It's their health, or maybe a relative's health. So there's some feeling in there that is charging that situation. And there's some things that may have gone right, wrong, or indifferent. And they don't necessarily know how to communicate what they want to happen. They just know what is happening is not what they want. So on the other side of that call, the person who's picking up the phone, being able to understand that, give them the ability to kind of communicate and say, all right, you're not yelling at me. You're yelling at me. I'm hearing you yell because you're frustrated. Where is that frustration coming from? And using the right language there, even without seeing that person, without being able to shake their hand, without being able to sit in the chair right next to them or right across from them, you can still do that with your voice.
Yes.
And that's super powerful. I mean, who hasn't gotten a customer call before where they're just, I mean, they've blown their top because you don't actually even know what happened to them that day. But it's just the fact that your employee came out and did something that just, that was the straw that broke the camel's back, right?
Yes. Yes. We never know what anyone is going through, has been through on any given day at any given moment. And so part of, I think, being an effective leader too, or effective, all of us are leaders in conversations and leaders in life. So for all of us, there needs to be a little bit of grace and patience with other people and not just making assumptions about them or not thinking about the possibility that something could have gone way wrong in their life prior to this conversation that's affecting it.
So what I'm writing down here is grace in your approach to a conversation allows for better outcomes, right?
Oh, yes.
So what I'm hearing here is, look, this could be for a conversation with an employee, it could be a conversation with a customer, it could be with your kids, your spouse, your
Yep.
significant other, father, mother, whoever else. I mean, this
Yes.
is not just. I mean, look, the lines between professional and personal are so blurred these days. Anyway, I mean, you
Yeah.
have your cell phone in your pocket all the time, and you're always on call. Really, regardless of the kind of job that you're in, your boss calls. You gotta pick it up at 8:30 at night. It doesn't may not call all the time, but you kind of gotta get up from dinner and gotta go have that conversation. So professional goes into personal, personal goes into business, and what you're talking about here, what you can guide people down a path of, kind of pervades throughout your whole life, right?
It affects your whole life and it has the power to make your whole life better. And when people are doing better all across the areas of their lives, they're going to perform better at work. They're going to be more efficient and more effective just automatically, just because everything is running well in their life. They feel appreciated, understood, valued, respected as well.
Yeah. I'm reading a book right now around how to create greater self confidence. And I don't know that confidence is really the issue that I'm looking to, um, that I'm really looking to strengthen, really just understanding more of where confidence comes from, right? And being able to understand myself and in a situation, kind of what's sort of bubbling up, what's coming up, and being able to understand those emotions where my daughter or an employee is incredibly frustrated at a situation, saying, what's actually happening here versus what's actually running through my head.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, my daughter, my son has done this again. Oh, my employee has done this or done that again. Instead of doing that, saying, so what's really the issue that we're trying to tackle here? They didn't have clarity. They didn't know what they were supposed to do. They got confused and may have been a little embarrassed by it. Being able to ask the right questions so that you can come back and say, so how can I help? Right? I mean, that's part of that grace,
Yeah.
right? How can I do that? Is that how you help people? Is that what people come to you for? I guess that's kind of where I'm leading to. How do they come to you? Why do they come to you? I guess is really where I'm leading to with that question.
Yeah, people come to me because they're having trouble connecting with others. They don't feel like they're being heard or understood. Even leaders, the people who report to them are not doing what they thought they should be doing based on what they thought they were communicating. So what we work on is, what were those messages that they sent? What went wrong? How does that make a difference? And then what can we do differently? How can we better connect to those people? So how can I help? Like you said, is a good question to ask. Another one is to imagine yourself, maybe I didn't make myself clear, and not like in a parent sort of way, a mad parent. Am I making myself clear? Not like that, but maybe I confused you. Have I confused you? Because if so, let me see if I can help unravel that.
Yeah, because it's about reaching that alignment or the congruence, right? Together.
Yes.
Because if you
Yeah.
got
Alignment. One of my favorite words.
if you see the same destination, there's a better chance that you guys are going to get to the same destination, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
So Al, appreciate you commenting and listening in. So Al says, a common scenario I hear: your boss is a nice person but talks too much. How do you get them to realize that, Helen? What?
How
How do you respond to that? Thank
do
you.
you tell your boss to shut up? No, not really. Um, well, you can, let's see, they're a nice person, so that's a good thing. You can remind them, like set in your mind, okay, I know my boss likes to talk. Let me make room in my day to hear my boss. And let me give my boss some boundaries. Hey, boss, I'm stopping by to catch up with you. I've got 5 minutes and then I'm going to get on that call that is going to help me get to company goal A, B, or C. And stay there and listen and be present for 5 minutes. But remind the boss that you're doing work for them and you need to set these boundaries. That's one way you could do it. If they come to you and start talking, stop and listen. You know that they value being able to talk to you. So stop and listen. And then after you start feeling a little uncomfortable, look for a place to pause and say, that's great. I know there's probably a lot more to say, but I know you also know I've got a lot of work to do here and I want to make sure I do it well for you. Something along those lines could help.
Yeah, something that Helen, when you and I have talked in the past, something that comes up to me based on sort of our conversations, Al. Look, I'm always looking when I'm trying to solve problems for others. I'm also trying to find out how do I reposition my perspective. And if I have someone, gosh, I know I talk a lot, so I don't know if you're pointing this at me. that's perfectly fine if you want. But Al, something I think about is if I'm trying to get somebody who does go on for some time, I say, hold on a second, I need you to help me a little bit because I'm getting a lot here. Can you give me 3 points that I need to take out of this, right? So here's what I've heard so far. What are the other two? Right? And get them to almost specifically enumerate what it is because so they kind of stop and they can say, yeah, so here's what number 2 and 3 are.
That's perfect. That's a great way to do it as well. Your situation is when they're talking a lot about the work that needs to be done or sharing their vision or something like that. My situation was they're just talking and filling up space. So I don't know what Al meant, but either way, what you just said is a great idea to just help them specify.
Al, I would love to hear which one you're kind of talking about because, that, like Helen said, there might be 2 ways to approach that. Helen, let's maybe look into that situation. So you've got this boss, likes to talk. I got to imagine there's a potential for that boss, that leader in this case, who is trying in their best way to articulate what that vision is, try to build that clarity. They're just not being very effective in this case, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're just continuing to maybe dance around the topic for a little while until they kind of hopefully hit somewhere around the target. How does that person usually realize it themselves? How does someone come to you? Is it because they realize it themselves or someone says, hey, look, I think you need to go talk to Helen?
Some of both. Some people do realize it themselves or have seen it in others and want to make sure that they are not doing that. I've had people that come to me when they've just newly been promoted to a new position, kind of middle management. They've got new people to report to, new people reporting to them, and they want to make sure that they are seen as a good leader in their new role. But there are others who have seen it in themselves and they come to me like, I know that I do this. I have a lot of clients that tell me, I know I talk too much and I need help in being more concise. That's very common among the clients that want to work with me one-on-one.
And I suspect getting to that concision is all about sort of internal clarity too, right? I mean, that's something that I know for me it took a long time to get to that myself. So it's not something that just I got concise now, right? That's a process at best, right?
It is a process. It is.
Al says so. One technique I use is to mirror their speech rate and amount once I get a chance. Helen, what comes to mind as you hear that from Al?
Well, it could work, or they could just still not get it. So if you do that and it's not effective, I would suggest another idea. So the choice then is are they just rambling and chatting about things that are not related to work and preventing you from doing your work? Or are they trying to communicate something to you about work that is too broad, too general, too rambling, and you need to help them hone it in and be more specific? In which case you might use more of the technique that I just talked about.
Yeah, just the ability to be very clear with them what you're not hearing or what's happening to you. As
Yeah,
in, I can't go as fast as you. You got to slow down a little bit for
that's
me,
right.
right?
Yeah, my brain works a little slowly here. So let me repeat back what I think you've said so far, and you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Al, maybe to that point, Al, something I do a lot of time is we'll be in a conversation with a bunch of people, and topics are coming from all over the place, and I'll raise my hand up and I say, "Look, guys, I assume I'm the dumbest guy in the room here. I don't understand all that. Can you make that simple for me to understand?"
Yeah.
That might be an approach. Vidya, thanks for chiming in as well. So Vidya says, often people are trying to impress others with their knowledge instead of ensuring that the listener comprehends the core message. Have you observed that? Helen, I want to see what you have to say about that.
Yes, Vidya. I have observed that. Oh my goodness. Some people really like to hear themselves talk. And they believe that the longer they go on, the more people will find them amazing. And they kind of need that for their ego. Uh, Definitely have observed that. And that is something, those are the clients I want to have as clients because I can help them. But those are the clients that are less likely to understand that they really could use help from someone like me.
And I think there's a three-letter word that you used in there that is kind of driving a lot of that, right? It's the ego. As soon as the ego starts to get involved in the conversation, it becomes much harder to um, allow themselves to shift their perspective. Because I believe once you start to see that your perspectives are wrong, you start to say, all right, I need to change some of my beliefs. And if I start to change my beliefs, my behavior is going to change. But if the ego is blocking that whole pathway there, nothing is going to happen. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I like to use an analogy when speaking. There's one, you can speak into a mirror, and everyone knows that a mirror is what we look at to make sure that we look okay before we go out into the world. We want to make sure that we see anything that someone else might see that might cause them to judge us. And we want to look and make sure we like what we see too. But sometimes we can get in the habit of what I like to call speaking into the mirror, which is not literal, but figuratively, it is when we're talking in front of the mirror, and one of two things happens. One is this ego is there. I'm talking. I'm so smart. I'm intelligent. They love to hear me talk, and the more I talk, the more they are going to respect me and think that I'm valuable. That's one way that people talk into the mirror. Another way that can happen in some leaders and certainly can happen to any of us in any time is kind of the opposite. And it's where we start having those negative voices in our head reflect back to us. Oh my gosh, I'm talking too much. They're not following what I'm saying. Look at their blank faces. I wonder if they even believe me. Have I made any sense? What's going on here? How am I going to solve this? And we're so caught up in our head because we're speaking in the mirror, that we can't connect. It's all about us in either case, whether it's the ego or the insecurity, it's all about us. So what I advocate in this analogy is not speaking into the mirror, but speaking into a frame, like through a frame that's open. So, frames, look at the frames in your office behind you. They are drawing our attention to what's inside the frame, right? When we speak, quote unquote, through a frame, we are doing two things. One, we are speaking in such a way that we're able to stay present with our audience, and that draws them into what we are saying. And I think the more important part of speaking through a frame is that it puts our audience into focus and helps us stay connected. So we're not caught in either the ego trap or the insecurity trap inside of our head.
Huh. Vidya, hopefully that gave you some insights there. I really like that because when you speak through frames, not mirrors, you make it less about you and more about them, which is that's what you're trying to get to happen in the first place.
Yes. What's a point of a leader if they don't make it about the people that are following them? I mean, it's only about ego at that point. You can't be an effective leader, in my humble opinion, without empathy, without seeking to connect with those you are leading.
Al has become very effective in the course of this conversation here and very succinctly says, I like that. Thank you, Al. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
I appreciate you giving us that. And I'm actually going to use that as a little bit of a fodder here, because maybe kind of even bringing out some more of Al's scenario there. If that person continues to talk to you and keeps just talking, being able to go to them and say, hold on a second, I don't operate and I don't know everything that you know. What does that mean for me? Distill that, simplify it, make it a nice little package with a little Tiffany gift wrap bow on top of it. What do I need to know out of that? Right?
Relevancy. What we say to people as leaders needs to be relevant to them. They need to have some skin in the game, as you say.
Yeah.
When I teach people about how to influence others, I have them go through a series of questions. And two of the most important questions about influencing others are the why and the how. And the why is not, why do I want them to do what I want them to do? The why is, why would they want to do what I want them to do? In other words, what's in it for them? That's the why that good leaders and effective leaders answer. Get the buy-in from the person. And just real quickly, the how, one would think it's, well, how will they do it? Well, that's not really the question. The question is, how can we as leaders make it easy for them to do what we're asking? Again, both of those turn it back so that we're focused on the people following us. We're focused on our audience rather than on us, because they are the way that what we want to happen is going to happen.
So I writing down some notes here. I said, so thinking of success in a conversation that you want to have with someone, and maybe there's two questions to think about in terms of as you look through that frame. Number one is, why would they do X or Y, right? Whatever you're asking them. Mm-hmm. If you can answer that question, that will help you tune in and get laser focused in terms of what message you're going to speak through that frame. Mm-hmm. And then number two is, how would they do it? Because now you're starting to set that pace, that vision for where they're supposed to go and what steps you might see, or what is that roadmap or pathway to get there. And then they can reflect back to you and ask you questions. I don't know if I understand that. I don't see the connections, but that's the kind of conversation you want to have, but you're getting somewhere at that point, right?
Yes. And another thing I'll say about the how part is many leaders are micromanagers, and that's out of fear. I know that as a parent who has tended to be a micromanaging parent. It's out of fear and this desire to control things. And like, okay, here are the A, B, C, D, E. Here are the steps you have to follow. So part of the how will I make it easy for them to do what I want them to do, is to give them as much autonomy as I can. Yeah. And that means I need to say specifically, what is the outcome? When is the deadline that I want this to happen? And then but within those boundaries, what can they do? What ideas can they come up with? How can they do it in a way that works for them and matches their skills and talents and gifts, but still ends up with the desired outcome that benefits us all?
So this is really interesting. I'm part of an organization called EO, the Entrepreneurs Organization. It's kind of call it as a support group for leaders, senior leaders in a company, because there's kind of this philosophy of what happens in EO stays in EO, right? So you get to kind of air your dirty laundry a little bit and kind of ask the questions you couldn't necessarily ask. And one of the things that they talk about, this idea of decentralizing decision-making, right? If you come up with a why and you give someone else the opportunity to figure out the how, that's good for you because you know what the why is and what the outcome is supposed to look like. They just need to figure out the steps, right? And that's really what you want other people doing, is doing all the thinking for you. I mean, I tell all my employees, look, me as the best leader is when I'm doing this and I'm just leaning back with my feet up on my desk. That means
Yeah.
I'm fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. Delegating, knowing how to delegate. I've had a client that is on his way to retirement, but he's not there yet. He's still got time. And it occurred to him that he hasn't really set up the people that report to him to be his successor. And that's another thing that I help my clients do, help leaders do. And what good leaders need to be doing is knowing what their exit strategy is and how to develop the people that are coming along and pass on the knowledge and everything so that it can continue and continue to grow.
So Vidya said, yes, love that mirror and frame, those mirror and frame references. And Al says, sounds like in some way you need to be assertive. Uh, is that the right way to think about it, Helen, in terms of your experience in guiding people down this path?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely want to be assertive because you don't want to come across as wimpy. But remember, we said assertive, not aggressive.
Yeah.
And assertive still has room for empathy. Assertive is just more of the tone in which we say it that shows our confidence in ourselves as a leader, our confidence in what we want to have done and when it needs to be done, and our confidence in the people that report to us.
Helen, I'm gonna throw something out there. I love that you made that distinction between assertive and aggressive, right? There's a huge gap between those two in terms of how the other person receives it. I have started over a long time, started to tune my processes that when I start to get really irritated, offended, aggravated, whatever the right word is there, in a situation, my first thing is to kind of push back, say, no, you're completely wrong. Instead, starting with a question. So maybe where I might say aggressive is pushing back, saying, no, I don't think you're right, right? Assertive is more of, well, why are you thinking that? Because that's not what I'm seeing. Help me understand. And getting them to refine their language or take a different approach to, I need to help this person along, which is really what you wanted them to do in the first place. Is that a fair way to approach that? And Al, I'd love your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, aggressive, I think, comes when we've had those things going on behind the scenes that have been bottling up. And it's a learned behavior. I think people learn it from other bosses or from family dynamics. There are people that haven't learned how to manage their emotions very well. And so aggressive can come across in your tone and the way you say things, but it can also come across in what you ask of other people to do. Sometimes it can be quite unreasonable. So assertive is asserting your authority as a leader, but in a way that still connects and values what your employees have to offer. Like you just said, instead of, no, that's not it. No, do it my way. It's, okay, that's not how I was thinking it would be, but I do value you. So talk me into it. Tell me why it needs to be your way.
And I appreciate that you brought this forward, and I hope you don't feel like I'm picking on you, but I think there's just such a valuable situation that happens in so many different ways and dimensions, right? And the opportunity to just give someone, the person that you're giving that feedback to, or saying, hey, you're just saying way too much, giving them the space to, without touching their ego, being able to say, hold on a second, it's just too much for me. Can you slow down a little bit? Can you explain that to me in a simpler way? Gives them the space to say, okay, they can't see it my way. Let me find out how I can do it. And they can pause for a little bit, and that's okay for them, right? That gives them the space to do that. So, and so Al says, what happens to me is that I ignore giving feedback for a long time. And when I finally do, I'm too assertive. Yeah, that emotion starts to build up. I think I'm kind of feeling that same feeling I've had in some scenarios running through my head, where you just hold back. You're like, I need to be respectful. I need to be respectful. And then 4 months later, like, I can't be freaking respectful anymore.
It just comes out. Okay. Thanks, Al. It's been a great conversation. Thanks for your participation.
Yeah.
That's been helpful. Yeah. Too assertive, I think, is that line that crosses into aggression. Yeah. And so what do you do in that situation when you want to give feedback, but you're not because of whatever reason? You're scared to, there's not the right moment, you don't know what the words should be, start writing down what you would say. Start thinking about what you would say, and at least get it out on paper, and make sure the paper isn't where everyone can see it, but give yourself a chance to start verbalizing the feedback you'd like to give them, or that scenario of, hey, wait a minute, you're talking too fast for me. My brain is several steps behind yours. Whatever that language may be, just go ahead and practice it and start getting it out.
Yeah, and thank you, Al, for participating. I do appreciate that. Hope all's well at the doctor. So I want to shift gears a little bit here, because the topic of, the title of your book, Voice Unleashed, speaking up with faith and courage. Talk to me a little bit about that idea, because I think that's what a lot of people associate with leadership, is this idea of being able to speak with a true passion, with a true commitment to yourself, and with this courage. Can you break that down for me a little bit? I'm trying to get you to distill the whole book into a couple of sentences here, but what does that mean?
Voice. What does voice unleashed mean, or mean to unleash your voice?
Yeah.
For me, it means that for many years and in many situations, I was doing what Al was saying. I was not giving feedback. I was not speaking up. And it would take me so much courage to try to say something that I would just decide, oh, it's better if I don't even say anything. It's not worth it. They're not going to pay attention to me anyway. So that affected me personally. That affected me in my faith, as a parent, as an entrepreneur, as someone trying to find my purpose. And so I wrote about my process. How did I unleash my voice? I'll tell you this much. It starts with claiming your own value. I believe we each, as human beings, have inherent value just because we were created.
Yeah.
And there's nothing we can do that takes that away. We can make bad choices. We can do some awful things, but still that inherent value is there. And that's what I had to do. I had to get to that point where I could claim that and kind of step into it. And once I did that, then everything else started falling into place. And I became a better leader for my kids. As a parent, I'm a solo entrepreneur, but I have people who work for me on my team in a contract basis. And I became a much better delegator to those people. I became much better at making decisions, which is important and crucial for a leader. And before I found and claimed my value and found my voice, I would not make decisions, and that would just cause more and more stress and more things to pile up, and clutter, literal clutter in my house and in my thinking and on my computer, because I wouldn't make those decisions. And that's one thing I have learned. And I think many leaders sometimes, I'll tell you this, are kind of put into leadership positions without the proper development and nurturing along the way.
Yeah.
They just find themselves there. Like that gentleman I was talking about before, someone like that who has to leave and hasn't had the chance to develop that person and give them the skills and training they need to continue in the work. So they're thrust into this new environment, and they're not confident about it. And I think when that is the case, if I were working with one of those as a client, and I have worked with many of those, where we start is that value piece, helping them see their intrinsic value and going from there. Because once you see it in yourself, it's a lot easier to recognize it in everyone else too.
Yeah. Gosh, there's a lot to unpack in what you just said there. That's why there's a book.
That's why there's a book.
Gosh, yeah. I'll talk. You were talking a little bit about your own personal journey in getting there. I think as I started to realize that I've always been curious about everybody that I meet. I've always believed that there's something I can learn from everyone. End of statement. Mm-hmm. But as soon as I started to shift that to everybody's a genius in their own right, it's really, am I intelligent enough to understand it? Right? That completely shifted the way the conversation happened with everybody, because now all of a sudden I want to give them the space to tell me what they see of the world. Because if they tell me what they see of the world, I just became better.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I think that's a little bit what I'm hearing from you is as you start to realize that this is what I am, but just as much what I'm not, right? You know where you stand and you're firmly standing on your own 2 feet.
Yes.
And anything that kind of starts to enters into your aura, your space, your zone, whatever you want to call it, right? Whatever is the right word there. As soon as you start to do that, you start to understand that influence that you all have between each other, right? And being able to speak with that courage and that faith then becomes much easier to do. Is that a fair way to state that?
Yes, so much easier. Yes, very well said.
Let's see, we've got some more comments here. So I appreciate all the input. I think this has really been
This is
shaping the
great.
conversation. Vidya says unconscious biases in people often target certain demographic groups when it comes to assertive personalities. Assertive women in the workplace is an example. I think there's probably a word that has been used with very assertive women over time. It's not necessarily a fair assessment, right? I think there's a valid point. I'd love to hear what you have to say about that. But also, Patricia says, I like the question you use with customer service when you have had to be assertive. Does that help?
Yeah.
Tell me what you think about what Vidya and maybe even Patricia said, or any
Sure.
thoughts you have.
Yes, I start. I don't know if you could see it in my face when I was reading that assertive women in the workplace. Women have it hard. Women have it hard. I'm just going to say it.
Yes.
Women as leaders have it hard. We are expected to be soft and strong, but if we're too strong, we're that B word, right? And we are not given the grace that we deserve. I'm just going to say that. As a general rule of thumb, that is not true all across the board. But women are working hard, and I'm working with a lot of women right now to make sure that they are more assertive, not aggressive, but assertive, and make sure that the way they say what they say can be received and appreciated and contribute to what the others, particularly men, are doing in the leadership circles. That's a very important part of my work right now. I'm speaking to many women's groups and companies too about that sort of thing. So Vidya, I think you're right that unconscious biases can affect that. And that just means that if we are in one of those demographics where other people have unconscious biases about us, we have to learn what it is we have to do to stand out and to speak up and to do it a little differently. And it's a shame that we have to do that, but sometimes we have to put in that effort to understand what's going on so we can break those biases.
I'm going to use a phrase that I've heard a couple of times. I think everyone else says it is what it is, right? I mean, it just is what it is. So now I think there's an opportunity to either react or respond. React is to get offended, to get mad by it, or respond is saying, so what I just heard from you, is that something that you think you would have said to everybody? Because there's some things that I'm sensing there that I think you may have used different languages with somebody else. Is that what you meant to occur? Right? Being able to maybe disarm the situation in that regard, saying, hey, I'm sensing something here. Am I hearing something that I'm not supposed to be hearing?
Yeah.
Maybe giving them the space to say, I didn't even realize I did that.
Yeah. And when we do that, we would want to say it in a lower tone. So,
Sure.
Okay, well, may I share with you what I heard you say?
Yeah.
I heard you say that you're a woman and you're not good enough. Your ideas aren't good enough. I bet you probably didn't mean that. Is that really what you meant to say?
That's right.
No. That's that assumption. We need to assume that others have good intentions, even the people that may treat us with these unconscious biases. And unconscious, many of those are happening because we are not aware of them. So it's important for us to help bring awareness, but do it in a way that's not threatening when we do.
Yeah, I think something that's kind of coming up for me as you've been talking about this is what's really important in the conversation is giving others, by asking a question, giving others the space to be silent and think, right? Because lots of times when we respond to people, we respond to them or react to them, and it's kind of putting them immediately, you're throwing a spear at them saying, that's wrong. You're way off base there. They now have to respond. I mean, the guards, the defenses come up, the spears come out, the arrows, whatever else, right? Instead of saying, a spear just came at me. Did you mean to throw that at me?
Yeah,
right.
Something like that. And also adding time. Putting a little cushion of time between that and when you come back with the feedback. When you said that yesterday, or when you said that earlier today, I just want to share with you what I interpreted it as. Those kinds of things. Sometimes that little bit of time can help too.
Great point. Patricia said, I like the question you used with customer service. Does that help? Any thoughts around that?
I think that's a great question. It's another way of asking, did what I said just make sense to you? Does it help? Does that answer your question? Because if not, I'm still here.
Yeah.
Let's figure out what your next question is. I'm with you.
And if you read that question, what you can also start, the subtext, the feeling that comes across from is, I'm here for you, right? When you say, does that help? I'm not trying to focus on whether I'm getting the tick mark and whether I just answered that call or not.
Yeah.
I'm focused on you still, right? Let's keep that lens on you.
That's right.
I think, look, most people are flattered, feel good when you do that.
Yeah. And they know we really want to help.
Yeah. So I've got just a couple more minutes. I wanted to see if I could get to, this conversation took a lot of turns and left turns and right turns, but I think it was actually a fantastic conversation on lots of dimensions. And I think hopefully it gave people a snapshot into what you do and how you think about shifting those conversations and how those conversations can really make such a difference in such a universal way.
Yes.
If you could give me, I don't know, 1, 2, 3 things that people could kind of use as a take-home message to maybe start being more effective and efficient in their conversations, what would those things be?
Well, I happen to have a phrase that I like to use, and I'd like to leave you and everyone else with this. The phrase is, speak up with heart. Speak up with heart, to me, talks about speaking from your heart. And that's the starting point of communication, my heart to your heart. Not just my mouth to your ears, not just my mouth to your brain,
right?
Not just my brain to your brain, but my heart to your heart. And then I also have an acronym with the word heart that I think sums up a lot of what we've talked about today. H is for honesty. We have to be honest. We have to be honest. Tell the truth.
That's a tough one sometimes.
E is for empathy, which we have talked about, understanding the perspective of those we're leading and seeking to understand even more and seeking to reach them in ways that meet them where they are. Excuse me. The third one, A, stands for alignment. One of my favorite words. We have to align with the value that we have intrinsically and the value that those we lead also have. And we have to align what we say with those values. R is for resolve, and that gets to the assertiveness and the confidence, but resolving to be an effective leader, setting that intention. And then finally, T is for tone. Our tone matters. So we need to pay attention to how we say what we say in terms of emotional tone, or if we're speaking in more of a condescending kind of way or a rude way. We need to think about how we want to come across. And once we just think about that, I want to come across as confident. I want to come across as reachable or approachable. I want to come across as friendly or concerned. Once we've set that intention, pardon me, excuse me. Once we've set that intention, we're halfway there to coming across the way we want to in our voice. So speak up with heart, honesty, empathy, alignment, resolve, and tone.
Well, Al, I know that you had to go somewhere else. Thank you for chiming in. Vidya, Patricia, I hope you all and anyone else who was listening got something out of this. I sure as heck did. Helen, thank you for spending time with me again. I always walk away from every one of our conversations with a bunch of things to think about and behaviors to change. Thank you for your time.
You are so welcome. Thank you for having me. And it's been a wonderful conversation for me too.
Yeah, thanks.